Hey guys, Art131 here, and we are in week 4 still. We're going to talk about assignment number 8, which is mapping shapes and shadows. Coat over chair is the subject for that. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. So the idea is to, again, learn how to shade different material, different subject matter. So chose for this assignment a coat over a chair. You have the chair, you have a coat, or it can be a small blanket or some other garment, but what you want to make sure it has is a lot of folds and crevices as you drape it over the chair. So that it has dark and light areas that you're shading in to create the shape of the garment. Now, the shape of the garment, when it's draped over the chair, has a lot of dips and folds and turns in it, creases, crevices, valleys, hills, and that's all represented by the dark and the light tones that you're shading into the drawing. Those tones are created by your light source, your single light source. And you want to show the direction of that light source, where it's coming from, what side. In this particular drawing, it's coming from the top right because you can see a cast shadow on the chair on the left side here from the garment, and also on the chair here. So also this part of the chair here, the post, is darker on one side than the other. So the light is hitting on the right side, where the light is coming from, the right side. And the left side, it gets a little darker gradually as it goes around this round post to the darker side. Then the light is not hitting on that side, so it's darker tones. That goes with the whole idea with this fabric. There's parts that are hitting the light is hitting on, it's catching on that part and not on other parts because of the garment is keeping the light from hitting in these crevices. It's hidden from the light. This is where you look at your subject matter, which is going to be a coat or blanket over a chair, exposing part of the chair, and then the other part of the garment is on maybe a third of the chair, 2/3, maybe a half. But you want to expose both. You want the chair and the garment. Draw both. It's best to actually put a background in, even if it's just a smudged tone that is lighter or darker than your subject matter, so that they separate themselves. That would be the best way to do this. And also, the ground might be a different floor, would be a different tone than the background. So they all separate themselves from each other. It's not all the same tone everywhere. But for a successful drawing is you're looking at this subject matter you've set up in front of you like a still life with a single light source. Single light source, not multiple, not 2 or 3 lights in the room. One to give you all the dark shadow sides and then the lit up sides. If you have multiple lights, it's going to light up everything and you're not going to get that shadow side as well. Then you will not have as much shape created by the tones you're putting in with all the light and dark areas. You won't create as much of a 3D appearance, 3-dimension, on your 2-dimensional plane, which is your paper. So you need that single light source. And then start noticing all the lights and darks. Now there's going to be several levels, probably 7. The very darkest area, maybe right there, right here. and the very lightest area about here and here, and then all these midtones in between that get a little darker, a little darker, I'm sorry, a little lighter, a little lighter, a little lighter, into the lightest tones. But you want to find all those, and you want to shade them in. And you're shading smooth, right? Because the garment is smooth. It's not necessarily scratchy. Unless you have picked some sort of coat that has a scratchy surface to it, then really show that. But it's not going to be shown by making, shading marks that aren't finished, or they're just quickly done. That'll look like it's a quickly done drawing that is unfinished. You wouldn't, if you're really going to show texture of some scratchy surface, then you really have to work on that. It's going to be intricate. This being smoother, you're going to get those tones and those shading tones with the side of your pencil, not the tip. Okay? Because the tip is not as broad a surface as the side. And so it's going to have a writing mark to it as opposed to a broad shading mark. And that's what you wanted, that shading mark. Okay, so let's look at some other examples. These are, some of them are student drawings and some are not. In this one, they're showing the entire chair on the floor and a cast shadow, which actually is not accurate because these legs right here are not going anywhere. I want to point that out. So, because the legs, when you're showing the cast shadow going up like this, that's showing this leg with a shadow. So this has really got to have the seat of the chair as well in here. And here they show it way up here, but this area actually would be covered because here's that area cast shadow down. These legs are not attached to anything, so this cast shadow is not going to end in with an empty space there. It's going to have the chair here as a cast shadow too, the seat. So that's something to look at this and go, oh, aha. And don't do that in yours if you're showing cast shadow. Make it complete. Also, very good contrast is what you want from all these. Darks and lights. That makes a very strong drawing. If everything's a similar tone, or if you have like 1 or 2, 3 tones in there and not several more, you're not going to have the contrast as much. So you really want to create contrast with the whole drawing, but particularly the chair. I mean the coat rather than the chair, because, or vice versa, but you need to have contrast in one or the other. And I'll show you one that actually may be working the other way. You have a lot of contrast in the cast shadow back here, which is strong because it makes the chair, which is a lighter shade, stand out. And then you have the garment, which is kind of interesting, the way they did the shading on it. There's a lot of character to all the dips and folds here, and then you have all the light and darks in here. Maybe not as much as I'd like initially when I'm thinking about it, but this drawing is very strong because you have these contrast areas. On the wall, the background is shaded. It's not a completely white as paper wall. The chair may be very light, so it's almost as white as the paper, but it does have a little tone into it. Then you have the cast shadow here, cast shadow here. That's creating a distance between the wall and the chair and the garment, because now you have a distance between them. Where without all that contrast in darks and lights, it would look flat. It wouldn't look like there's distance. So it's a very strong drawing in that respect. It has a 3D appearance. I'll show you one more here. And this is very strong because there's dark areas back here and on the code here and very light area here and on all the in between tones, which are semi-similar to the background, but they are separated nonetheless. There's a light area here, darker here, lighter here, darker here, lighter here, darker there. So wherever they meet up, the background and your subject, you want to have a lighter or darker tone there meeting up so that they're not all similar and they're going to get lost in each other and you won't have the presence that's necessary to create with the chair and the garment and the background being separate. So you really want the background to be lighter or darker in whatever area. It doesn't have to be all the same everywhere in the background. It can be lighter and darker here and there. And this is just kind of smudged in and stuff, but it's not amateur. It's well done because it's finished. It's not just scratched in there really quick. I can tell when you're scratching in, to try to shade really fast and get this over with. I can tell that it didn't take you very long to do that, and so those are not sophisticated marks. You need to have more effort, more time spent, more thought process. Okay, so there's your examples of chairs with coat over them. There were several. Set up yours, your chair and your coat. Make sure there's folds and dips and crevices in it. It's not just flat, or you're not going to have a good composition. You're not going to have a good subject to draw from. You want to show the shape of this thing. Not that it's flat, because we're not drawing flat stuff. We're drawing subject matter that has a lot of dips and turns in it and a lot of lights and darks with the light sources hitting on there or not, and that's going to create the shape. If it's all flat, it's boring and we're not drawing that. That's not a good practice. Okay, so let's talk about the homework, which is drawing your own eyes and reflected in a mirror. So that's a good way to do it. If you can get a small mirror and look at your eyes as you're drawing, then that's a good way to do it. Otherwise, take a photo of your eyes and draw from that. But it's got to be bigger than your phone. You know, if you're drawing from a little tiny thing on your phone, a little image on your phone, it's very hard to get all that detail and really notice what the tones are. So really, if you're going to do your phone, a phone photograph, then you need to put that on the computer, I would say, so that you have a larger image to be working with. That's why the mirror is probably more preferred, because it's pretty accurate to the size of your eyes at that what you're looking at, and that's a better subject to draw from. Okay, so let's talk about some of the images with eyes. This actually is a drawing. There's lots going on in an eye. First of all, it's the shape of the eye. You're going to look at your own shape of your eye, and you're going to notice that it isn't just a complete oval or round, or even like an anime eye. It's realistic. It's kind of got an almond shape to it, relatively, except for now you have this area over here that kind of comes out to a point, and so does the back end over here. It's not round on those edges, on those corners. There's a gradual coming around with the lids. What you'll notice more than not is that the top lid covers the iris, which is the colored part. It covers the iris more than the bottom lid, typically. Usually the iris meets the bottom lid, or maybe slightly covered up by it. Maybe there's a little space here, but it certainly doesn't get covered as much as the top lid is covering the iris on the top. That's first off to notice. Also, this reflection mark from light source in the room, you probably see that in your eye if you have light shining somewhere on your face. you're probably going to see that reflection mark. If you put that in by just either leaving it void of graphite or actually erasing out tone from the graphite that you put in, erase it out there. Don't border it with a line. There's no border line around it, any of this. That's one thing I want to say about all drawings. Mostly, there is no border line around everything. It's, I mean, if you really look at it, it's just shades that end somewhere or they meet up with other shades without a border line. You know, the border line is basically not accurate. It's not really there. This is just shades here when you look that end somewhere. Now the lines in the lashes are there, but they're not bordering anything. They're just there because these are very thin hairs. So that's how you have to draw them. But there's no border going around here and around here and around the whole iris and around the pupil and around the uh, reflection mark. There's not. It's just that one shade meets another, one shade meets another, and that's how they create their border or their difference or their edge, however you want to talk about it, without a line, bordering things. Really look at this. When you're looking at your own eyes, really look at what you're looking at. There's no border lines. You think it may help you with the drawing, but it isn't accurate, and it actually starts looking more cartoon when you do that. So these are all just shades that meet up. Now this may be a thin shade line here, but it's a shade line nonetheless. It's not a tip of the pencil drawing. Okay, so I'm going to show you some other ideas here. Of course I said eyes, right? I just showed you one eye to focus on an eye. But I want you to draw both your eyes. Two eyes. I'll say that again. Two eyes, because what happens sometimes is students will send me one eye. When I said draw your eyes. So eyes is two. Draw both. Another thing you want to notice is that bird is very noisy back there. I always do that and he shuts up. Okay, so in the middle here, the bridge of the nose is not lines. It isn't like line, line. No, this is shading that ends up catching light here, so that he's not going to shade right there as much. And then it gradually gets darker back in here, around under the eye, and coming to the side of the face, or the side of the nose bridge, it starts getting shading in there, but it's not a line. So don't draw lines here, because I'm just going to ask you to erase them and draw shading. So notice the shading, there's no lines right there. There's no lines right up in here either, really. There might be if you have really, I may ask in any drawing you have to send me a photo of what you're working with, because I want to see what you've been looking at and now how you're predicting it and drawing it, putting it on paper. If I find something that seems like out of place or odd or possibly not accurate, then I'm going to ask to see that. What you want to notice as well as the space between the eyes is probably around the same length as an eye. So from that corner to that corner, it's about an eye space. So don't make it too thin or too wide. It's basically within reason, relatively, give you a little inch there to work with, but or half an inch, whatever, but you typically are going to work with an eye space in the middle. Okay. Here again, the reflection mark. The top of the eyelid is covering the iris more than the bottom. The pupil is dark. They're not really small little pupils like a beady eye or huge like an anime eye. They're somewhere in the middle. Now, you want you to notice that about your own eyes. Put in the lashes. They're not perfect unless you have made them perfect with makeup. Then draw them that way, but otherwise, they're probably not perfect. They're different hairs come out in different spaces. Some are a little longer than others. And that's what you want to notice as well. One last thing you want to notice is that the white of the eye is not completely white all over. If you do that, it won't look like it's round. Because you have the reflection mark, it's going to look glassy. And because you shaded the corners of the eye and down around with different shades on the white, it isn't totally white. So there's different shades in here on the corners and everything. That's going to show it that it's round. It makes it look more round that way. It's not totally white. So I think those are both female eyes. Here's some male eyes. Reflection mark again. Now the bottom of these are a little bit more covered, but not as much as the top, as you'll notice. The top eye of the top lid of the eye is covering the iris more. Okay, so everybody's got different eyes. You may have to bring this eyebrows down a little bit on this one, depending on what your eyes look like. I think these are more scratchy kind of lines here that aren't as smooth as skin, but it still works as a drawing. I don't prefer them being lines because it really isn't accurate when you really look. But it can bring some character if they're not too drastic, like you droop a line. These are kind of shading lines. This is better shading up here, in my opinion, and down in here, it's a little smoother. But again, the whites of the eyes are not completely white everywhere. The corners get a little darker in there, a little shading going on in there. Show you one more. Even this one has a little shading right here in the corner on the white of the eye. And that's going to make it look round. Now, all of these have a reflection mark. I think the iris and the pupil is a little small in these. They're kind of beady looking. So you don't have to draw the nose. I'm just after the eyes. If you want to draw the nose, that's fine. But right in here is all shading. It starts getting lighter and lighter right about here, and then a little darker here where the light source is not hitting. You'll notice this on your own face. Of course, you're looking at color, right? And none of your skin is white as paper, so really not too much of your skin is going to be as white as the paper. The part of the eye you're leaving totally white right there is probably this white as the paper and the reflection mark. Rest of it really should have some sort of tone, even it's very faint. But you want to show reflection marks on the nose from light source and other areas, like right up in here and here. You want to leave it pretty light. When you bring in the other shading, it'll have contrast. But in my opinion, you should be shading all skin with some sort of tone, even though these are not that way. I think that's really more accurate, but at least show most of that shading, because skin has a color. It's not totally white as paper. If you look at this and think of that as anybody's skin, it really isn't accurate. Okay. So that's it for now. Let's talk about the midterm presentation, which I said was due next week. It can be due by Sunday next week, which is like pretty far off. It's the 1st, right? So they've got next week and then the 1st. By the 1st, send me your midterm presentation. The midterm presentation is a 5-minute long Google Slides or PowerPoint or a video or something like that you create a presentation with and send it to me. The video can have audio and you can have you in it if you want. But it's also has to have 5 images of what you're talking about that are different. They're not the same image. 5 separate different images about what you're presenting on. And it also has to have your own artwork that relates to your subject. And if you're going to talk through it, you don't have to have text. You're talking like you're presenting in class. Or if it's a Google slide or a PowerPoint, you're going to have text as well as those 5 images and your artwork. One piece of artwork that you created that relates to your subject in one way or another. Now, the subject matter is an artist, about an artist maybe, about an art movement, or an art style, or technique, or method. It can be about something in art history. It doesn't have to be about drawing and painting only. It can be about anything in art. It can be about various things: cake making, costumes, makeup, jewelry, uh, woodworking, metalworking, ceramics, fabric working, performance art. It can be about a lot of things. Okay, in art, as long as it's about art, you're presenting on the subject. You're you're talking about why you like it, where it came from, who's doing it, and then how you did it, what that meant, what your artwork meant, and how you're predicting this particular art you're presenting on. Okay, if it's an art movement, it can be about, there's various. If you don't know them, look them up. Research art movements. You'll find Impressionism, classical, neo-classical, modernism, postmodernism, surrealism, impressionism, which I love, pop art, um, all kinds of art movements, uh, abstract and abstract expressionism. All these were art movements, and the artists tend to group around that particular art movement, which most likely, most of the time, morphed into another art movement, kind of feeding off of each other. Okay, and like there was post-impressionism after impressionism, so it kind of moved on to other movements. So you find out what you like about that. Maybe you're going to present on one of those movements, and then you talk about certain artists that do that, and then what your artwork means about that and how you did it. Or you're going to talk about a particular artist like Van Gogh or somebody, or any in any art medium. Maybe you're just going to talk about an art medium like watercolor or oil paint or drawing with chalk or pastels. Any art medium. It could be ceramics, could be sculpture, found object sculpture, or just regular sculpture. It's an open book. When you maybe find out what you like. If you're doing something artistic out of this class, and you want to show your artwork on that and talk about what that is, that's fine too. All right. Any questions? Let me know. If you're wondering if your subject is a good one to do, then pass it by me and we'll talk about it. Otherwise, get started on that because it's going to be due sometime next week. All right. Let's leave it at that, and we'll talk with you next week.